we talk about the prison state, right? So this can be understood at least two different ways, right? So one is a state defined by the number of prisons it has and how many people it has in prison, but it also can be defined as the state itself as a prison, right? So either one of you think, well, when you think about a concept of the prison state, what does it incorporate for you?
So briefly, we had a discussion about this when we was on your podcast. So it's the framework of thinking, most importantly, what I've come to identify as how our minds are regulated immediately throughout the K-12 experience to live inside of a prison system. So I myself served over 25 years in prison. I entered into that station when I was 15 years old, did 3 years as a juvenile, and then proceeded to do 21 straight years as an adult. But what I found was there were some similarities with regards to the ideologies that's utilized, or the framework of thinking that's utilized inside those prison spaces that was very much similar to my K-12 experience in my urban environment. Right? So my schools were underserved. The teachers I had were overworked, woefully underpaid, and in some instances, culturally irresponsive to my Latino African identity, right? From that space. So the short answer to that is that you may think that you're free. A very subjective term of freedom. Right? You may think that you're free until you're a black boy in a classroom and you're told to sit down and stop moving so much. When it is your cultural identity to be moving, right? In the community I grew up in, we moved, we played, we had fun, we were children, right? I go into a classroom and now I have to sit with my hands on the table like this, and I have to pay attention to the teachers in front of me who's representing a hierarchy. And God forbid should I say, don't talk to me like that. My mother said you can't talk to me like that. And what happens? Get out of my classroom, go to the principal's office. Then that child is being regulated now. That child is being surveilled. God forbid that child gets suspended, gets expelled, ends up in prison. So where does prison begin? I say it begins in the classroom.
You and I have had this conversation before. So if you want to talk about the idea of criminalizing development, right? You're a kid, right? You need to be a kid, but it's criminalized.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, me and Chin, we've had these conversations several times at the Return to Citizen Support Group. We're at 32 Prince Street on Thursdays every 7 p.m. And what we have there is we've come to learn from our community with that lived experience. That you're right, like our developmental stages were criminalized because of our phenotype, the way we looked, the way we dressed. Beautiful Emmett Till, I spoke about this before, right? Emmett Till had beautiful eyes, right? But during his time, they were scary eyes. They were eyes that needed to be watched. They were eyes, unfortunately, that had to be excommunicated from the world. There's a developmental stage that happened there. He whistled, allegedly, at a white woman. So he was being a child. He was trying something new. I'm from the North. I don't care how y'all do it in the South. I'm going to whistle. And we know what happened, right? Trayvon Martin walking through the hood with a hoodie on. Not even the hood, meaning neighborhood, because that's where the word hood comes from, it's neighborhood. We just shortened it and made it fly, right? So he's walking through the community with his hoodie on. He has Skittles. He's in the developmental stage of being an adolescent. Somebody thought that he was being criminal. That's the way I view it when it comes to that developmental stage. Is how it's the way we look and the way we interact with the world that's dominantly white landowner frameworks that leads people to being impacted the way we have.
Especially in the K-12 system, right? There's not even 3 strikes you're out in the K-12 system. It's 1 strike, right? You've got a record, you've got a name. So your thoughts on sort of the prison state as an idea?
Well, I mean, just to piggyback on what Khalid was saying, it's culture, right? It's colonialism, right? So this is not something that just happened. If you're black or brown in this country, you're a criminal. I don't care how successful you are, right? And that starts with school, right? School to prison pipeline, right? we have metal detectors, we have armed security guards in our school, and our children, every day when they go to school, they being indoctrinated, right, to transfer not from school to college, but from school to prison, right? Because, like, our kids are not doing anything wrong, but yet you're treating them like they are. Like you're saying, you're a criminal. It's like, you know, we have the presumption of innocence, right? But it depends. If you're black or brown, that presumption doesn't exist, right? It's on us to prove our innocence. It's the same thing with our kids. If we tell our kids, black and brown kids, you're a criminal, right? And that's how we're going to treat you, right? But it's culture, right? It's culture that exists, right? In our police departments, in our corrections, right? And so they create policies that criminalizes us and treat us like criminals, not civilians, and part of the larger society. Same thing with the prison system. They criminalize us, right? They have this culture that they treat us like animals, like subhumans, right? And so we in that environment, right? And so the only way that we're going to change that is to change that culture, right? Until we change those cultures, we're always going to have that.
Right. Right. And you both mentioned, you know, the idea of sort of an imposition of outside culture, right, on developing kids, right? And you made the connection to colonialism, right? And I think one of the really important contributions of indigenous scholars in the last, you know, couple of decades is the idea that colonialism is a process rather than an event, right? Colonialism is ongoing, it's happening right now, right? Not only in our land, but it's happening in our schools, like as you're saying. So thanks for coming. Hi. So the question that I started with was the idea of a prison state, both sort of a society defining itself by prisons and how many people it has in prison, but also the idea of society itself as a prison. And if there's any thoughts you had on how you conceptualize the prison state.
Well, I mean, that's a multi-layered contradiction to prison state. I mean, we have anthropologists that will tell us that prisons or confinement, as we know it, is a consequence or is a feature or a correlative of the industrial state, industrialization of our society. In early human.
Speak up the room. They can't hear you. Speak up a little bit.
Sorry, excuse me. Can you hear me? There are anthropologists that maintain the idea of the concept of incarceration, of imprisonment of individuals who violate the norms and the rules of the culture of the society, of the tribe, is a feature of modern industrialization, is a consequence of the industrial, creating the industrial working class, so to speak. I mean, that's a qualitative, something that's related also to the idea and notion of the state. And of course, the state has power and the capacity to control behavior. So in prehistoric, or I don't want to use the term prehistoric, early cultures, before industrialization, before the creation of the type of working class, that modern working class that we know now, deviant behavior and deviant individuals were basically banished from the collective. They basically banished or punished in a way that protected the culture from their behavior and imitation of it. But we have our modern philosophers, I believe it was, it might have been Engels, who said that education is basically the training of of the working class into the values and the standards of the most powerful class in society. So if we look at education as that, then we could see that the prison state, the carceral state, serves a dual function. And like I said, this is a multi-layered, multifaceted issue. Because where was prisons during the Bullwhip days? How did prisons function and operate in the early European settler states, where in essence, the settlers themselves were surrounded by territory and an environment that one could say that they were in an existential prison. I mean, so how do you couldn't banish a miscreant. I mean, you could throw him to the neighbors, but then again, he might come back. He might come back and haunt you, with the neighbors. But I'm saying that the way we look at prisons today, I mean, the way I view them today, is a class and caste instrument of control and repression of working people, of unemployed, of poor people. I think that with the demise of chattel slavery and the ending of sharecropping or feudalism, American form of feudalism, and struggle against apartheid and institutional segregation, has brought us to the point where the ruling class, those who have power and control, use prisons in order as a pushback against the struggles and the gains of former people who were chattel slaves. The brother was talking about our situation here in the diaspora. We are in effect a domestic colony, and so prisons function in that sense. Of dealing with the inordinate amount of surplus labor. I mean, back in the Bullwhip days, we were all employed. It was universal employment. You see, all being unpaid. But as we progress, as we gain so-called citizenship and civil rights, what happened to that population? What happened to the descendants and the children of the former chattel slaves? We become fodder for the prison industrial complex. Mm-hmm. We become a permanent underclass. I mean, I don't want to just keep going on, but I just want to end by my personal experience in prison as a political prisoner. And before I became a political prisoner, I was able to see the difference in the character and the age and the demeanor of young people coming into prison. And by the time I left prison in 1993, in 1990, the population in prison had completely changed. You had the children of the crack generation who came to prison. They were severely psychologically challenged, sociologically challenged, socially challenged. One thing that really stood out for me was that they did solitary confinement. They couldn't handle solitary confinement. And by that, I don't mean that solitary confinement is something that's normal to a human being, to be isolated and put into a cage about 23 hours a day. I don't mean to say that that's something normal. But they couldn't stand to be alone with themselves. They needed constant stimulation. They would talk all night. I mean, literally talk all night, make noise. They couldn't contemplate anything in silence. They couldn't be with themselves. And when I first went to prison, that wasn't the case. I mean, we were in isolation. Sometimes we were in isolation, and yeah, there'll be a period of, banter and talking and passing stuff back and forth. But eventually things would get quiet, and you were left with yourself. And so what I'm trying to say is the society that creates, the brother was talking about the system that we term euphemistically the school to prison pipeline, and the brother was pointing out how the control, behavioral control, psychological control, behavioral control begins in the household. It begins in when the child first enters into the family. But the family is a reflection of the broader society, and the rules and the standards and the values of that broader society. They may not be in a class position or in a position to take full advantage of those rules and things, but they still are affected by it. So I think that that prisons in post-industrial society and in this age of globalization is something that we have to rethink in terms of how do we handle those who are so damaged amongst us that they engage in deviant behavior, they engage in behavior that's detrimental to everyone around them. Do we isolate them? Do we punish them? Do we torture them? How do we deal with this matter? And I think we have reached the level of understanding of human behavior and human psychology to understand that warehousing human beings does not work. Warehousing human beings does not change in a positive way, does not change the behavior of the individuals that we have to deal with in society sooner or later. So I think that just like policing, modern policing has to be rethought. It can only be rethought in the context of resistance and struggle, in the context of opposition to what we know is inhuman, to what we know in front of us is transcends our ability or capacity to engage and develop the human spirit. I mean, everyone, I believe that we are all products of both nature and nurture, and that we have yet to define which behavior deserves punishment and which behavior deserves rehabilitation and treatment.
I want to pick up on that point, but I wanted to mention two quick things. So there is pretty compelling evidence that during the early colonial period in the U.S., that people who were taken by indigenous communities, when given a chance to go back, didn't. They were like, no, I'm gonna stay with my new family. I'm gonna stay with my new folks, right? Because they felt like it was a better community, a more equitable place. And in terms of socialization, schools as socialization, there's a great book by this literacy historian Harvey Graff called The Literacy Myth. I don't know if any of you read The Literacy Myth, but it really calls into question the idea that mass schooling is some triumph of democracy, right? And that mass schooling actually is a response to the fact that the working class was more or less teaching itself to become literate, right? And the ruling class was like, can't have that. So rather, if we bring them into schools, we can control what they're reading and what they're becoming literate with, right? And so mass schooling is not necessarily a thing to celebrate. But I think your last point is something we can follow up on, right? And I think each one of you touched on this. The idea of crime as a construct, right? What gets labeled a crime and what doesn't get labeled a crime? Who gets labeled to be a criminal and who's not a criminal, right? And that these labels serve as social control, right? So one of the reasons that we changed the name of our zine to the Abolition Blotter is kind of a response to the police blotters that are in newspapers, right? And if you look at the police blotter, it's always like break-ins, car thefts, right? It's never environmental crimes, wage theft, right? It's never any of those sorts of crimes. It's always just sort of like property crimes. So So what is the way that like sort of crime as a concept or criminal as a label is used as a means of control?
Many of our members from the Return to Citizen Support Group find it's very important that you own your own personal narrative, but also the narrative that benefits the community you come from. So recently, at least those of us who are trying our best to pay attention. So TikTok is a place where narrative started to go away from the dominant narrative. Suddenly, the narrative that has shaped the Palestinian existence, right, wasn't falling on American ears well, because now we're able to see with our eyes that no, you eviscerated a child with a bomb that was U.S. made. Oh, and we also know what the schematics of that bomb looks like. It's called the Hellfire bomb. And there's this bomb. Like, you actually gave it these names, right? And you wanted to drop it on the population of people because you criminalized their existence. So it begins with the narrative. You have to be able to shape the narrative around somebody being perceived to be a threat to the status quo, right? So if we free the Palestinians, what's going to happen? Well, they're just going to come across the wall that we built, right? And they're going to go under the tunnels that get under the walls that we built, that got the razor wire and the guns that are aimed at them. And they're going to come and do to us what we do to them. That's the actual narrative. Right? They're climbing the walls and they're going under the walls and they're going to do to us what we've done to them for 75 plus years. Mm-hmm. But damn it, TikTok, you people out there with free thinking started to utilize this thing that was supposed to be about kids just dancing in the mirror, right? Like, y'all took it and started to utilize it to reshape the narrative, to speak truth. So we're going to ban it. We're going to ban it, right? Until we introduce the idea of our hero being the one who brought TikTok back. Right? Because we need the narrative. Like, the narrative is more important than anything, because there's going to be at least 45 million of you that are going to believe that our hero saved TikTok. And then we're going to be able to shape around that narrative that he took a bullet, right, and survived it. He's miraculously had people around him that are supposed to be like Secret Service agents, and suddenly that day they forgot to cover him, or whatever the case may be, or like escort him off. We got to get that photo out, right? So the narrative is what shapes the idea that leads us to believe that it's okay to lock people up, to kill people. Because if you sit down in a room, we used to have this conversation right here, and we would say, someone in this room for sure did some bullshit last night. I know, because we're human. We did something stupid last night, whether it was scrolling or actually doing something, right? Now let's take a vote on what we should do with that person. Should we put him in prison or should we kill him? Nobody in here is going to say, let's lock him up or let's kill that person for being human. But the narrative that has been established based off the 13th Amendment, right? We look at that 13th Amendment, essentially says, you will eradicate slavery except from a radical state, or you cause some harm to the state, then we have a place for you, right? So it begins with that. I'm a real big proponent of the idea we are a Return to Citizen Support Group of owning your individual narrative and then also falling in line with regards to the narrative that we as a community hold to be true as being formerly incarcerated people.
And I think the thing that you mentioned about, folks worrying that the Palestinians are going to do what we've done for them for the last 75 years, that runs across society, right? There's a classic line from, I think it's Oswald in the UK that's like really, really racist British how talking about rivers of blood and that sort of stuff. And he's got this amazing quote where he was like, oh, if there's going to be demographic shifts, then the black man will have his hand on the whip, right? So that's this understanding of the world that there has to be a whip, right? There has to be a whip and somebody has to have their hand on the whip, right? Not like there doesn't have to be a whip, right? Like, no one's going to hold that whip. So thoughts on crime, the idea of crime as a way to control people?
Well, I think the criminalization of the ability to criminalize your enemies, to criminalize those individuals or those classes of individuals or ethnic groups is a pretty routine psychological method of warfare and struggle and human struggle. I think that, as an activist myself, as one who really believes that reform is not something that we need to look at as bringing about radical change of the system like white supremacy, or white supremacist construct. You can't reform white supremacy. You can't reform a white supremacist construct. And one that pretends to be a democratic construct at the same time, where you have the rich and the oligarchy basically controlling the political duopoly, the political system. You realize that not only can't you reform this power paradigm, we could struggle for reforms that bend and pressure the system until hopefully it breaks. But basically, the ruling class in America, they were very shrewd racists and white supremacists. They created an electoral college system so that they would never have to succumb to a popular insurrection by vote that would take their property and privilege from them. They created that electoral system as a escape mechanism. So therefore, where we are at right now, and one of the things I've tried to popularize is that we're living in a democratic fascist arrangement here in the United States. When we break it all down and take off all the dressing. And the only way to change that construct is that there has to be a democratic distribution of the pay. There has to be, because the down oppressor, the oppressors, they have no sense of shame, of remorse, of constraint. They're motivated solely by their own interests and greed and whatever, and power. And if you're powerless, they'll stomp your brains out. They'll walk right over you. They'll do whatever they want to. But we know from the struggles in Vietnam, we know from the people's struggles in Nigeria, we know from the liberation movements that have been successful, that once the enemy, once the colonizer, once the oppressor, once the capitalist ruling class can no longer rule peacefully or use their monopoly of violence on working people, once that no longer has the effect that it has of intimidating and stopping people from resisting and turning them into basically willing slaves, is resistance. But we know that we could use the struggle of the Palestinian people today. We are at the crossroads of a struggle where there supposedly is a peace deal in operation as we speak. It's a staged peace deal. But we know that Biden had the same peace deal on the table 8 months ago and didn't act on it. And there's a reason why he didn't act on it. Because the United States is a European settler state. It is a white supremacist construct. And the Zionist state of Israel is the last of its kind, is the last of the European settler states in a region that is crucial and vital to the hegemonic and geopolitical control of the And so, that being said, the resistance of the Palestinian people reverberates around the world. It has something to say to all of us people, that the colonization, imperialism, white supremacy, apartheid, and all of those evils that enslave mankind cannot be tolerated. And resistance is the only mechanism in need of eradicating. And that resistance has to, will incur sacrifice, will incur pain. And I think the Palestinian people have shown, just like the Vietnamese people who didn't get the memo that they were supposed to lose. against the mightiest military power on the planet. They weren't supposed to win that struggle, but they fought from one generation to the next, and they did. The Palestinian people have endured occupation, have endured violence and murder for over almost a century. And they're still here, they're still resisting, and they fought the Israelis and the Zionists to a standstill. All of their objectives that they claimed that they wanted, the eradication of Hamas, the movement of or eradication of Palestinian people, the separation of their lands, you know, they went all in on the Palestinians to eliminate. And today we're talking about a peace treaty, a peace. So what I'm trying to say is that although many of us sitting here probably have engaged in some type of reform activities and organizations and mobilization in the community to deal with the most egregious violations of institutional inhumanity, namely homelessness, prisons, and treating poor people as if they were deranged or demented or something wrong with them. I think that the only solution to that is revolution. The only solution to that is to organize ourselves across intersectional lines, across our identity politics, into a massive force of will and power. We have to empower our people where they are. We have to let those who are empowered understand that if they pursue policies that are detrimental to us, there will be a consequence. There will be an equal distribution of this pain. And whenever body bags came home to the imperialists, whenever they had to endure years and years of resistance that they couldn't crush, they eventually had to throw their hands up and leave. And so resistance does work. The spirit of the human being, the spirit of humanity, the subjective factor is the dynamic factor in people's struggles for freedom. And Black Panther Party used to say that the spirit of the people is greater than man's technology.
Sure.
You know, I don't know if you want to pick up on that point. So the idea of like the struggle and resistance, and you've done it in multiple different locations, right? So in the incarcerated setting and outside of the incarcerated setting. So, do you want to say anything about strategies that you've learned around organizing resistance, around organizing, pushback in these different locations?
Well, one of the things that as an organization, as a movement, is empowering the people, like you said, because it's our will, right? We survive mass incarceration.
That's right, Jim.
Because of our will.
That's
and
right.
Our beliefs, and so controlling our narratives, right? But I want to go back quickly to what you asked about how this country has a history, right, of justifying war by criminalizing certain cultures, certain communities, right? And one of the examples that I want to cite is the war on drugs, right? America justified that when it affected minorities, black and brown people, right? But as soon as it started crossing into the suburbs, right, they started saying, "Oh, now we got to create these drug courts. Now we got to treat it. It's not a criminal issue. It's a disease, right?" So now the next thing they're criminalizing in the black and brown community is mental health, right? They're killing, they're shooting people, So these are the narratives that as a movement that are in the community that we have to organize to change, right? So that they can stop criminalizing certain, mental health or conditions that exist, poverty in our community, and criminalizing.
And certainly I think, with the issue of mental health, folks who are either, neurodivergent, or dealing with mental health issues, generally not allowed to speak for themselves, right? And so their perception, their perspective, what they want out of the world, what they want in society is not included in the conversation. So thoughts on organizing, pushing back against this?
So there's the two types of organizing. You have organized money, you have organized people. Government has organized money. People United, they essentially said that the dollar is free speech. Lobbyists are very effective in campaigning money. We don't know who they are. I mean, you can look them up. For those who want to research, you can look and find out who's been donating to the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. Turns out the Zionist movement has been donating to both parties. They're somewhat equally, right? Why? Because no matter who's there, it's the money, that organized money, that lobbying, that's getting policies to be enacted. This is where we fit in now as organized people. I don't like t-shirts. And what I mean by that is I do not like how we have been somewhere led down this path to believe that wearing a t-shirt is an effective means to change yourself. Or having a hashtag. I call that lazy organizing. Or not organized at all. Right? To have a hashtag that has 35 million responses from a person's couch is mind-boggling to me. Like, I did something today. I tweeted. Or X, whatever the other is now, right? Or I have 35 million likes on my Instagram. Shit, I made it. I did something, right? No, you haven't. Because it hasn't changed. But every person in this room has a self-interest. What ties us together is being able to identify those interests are together. So the Zionists have a self-interest. The government that's here and the status quo that operates with them has an interest, and it's colonizing everywhere they can go. Everywhere they can go, including Greenland. And we watch that take place. That's what gets them moving. That's what gets somebody to pay $1,000 for a chicken sandwich at one of their events. Because they have a common interest. We here have common interests. The only difference is we're not talking to each other and how to collectively organize and push that power forward. We don't have to be millionaires to affect change. We just got to stop wearing t-shirts and doing hashtags and thinking that we're being active by doing it. Right? Like so in order for us to be effective in organizing, it would have to be that. It's having one-on-one conversations, finding out what our self-interests are, connecting with other people who have like minds, getting into a space like this, and identifying an issue that's worth targeting as an individual group, and then as a group, coalescing around that, and then finding out who's the individual or entity who's in the way of getting that issue resolved, and then finding out who actually has power to go up against that person. And then campaigning around that person who has the power to actually get something done to push that person who's wants to keep the status quo around out. But then you don't stop. You say, okay, what's the next issue? Because we're 100 deep now. We just got a victory. So now how do we get more people around to get safer schools and get them damn cops out of our schools? Because if we organize around that, you get them out of the school. But I promise you, if you just keep hashtagging, they ain't going nowhere.
The t-shirt thing reminds me of, there was a punk band called Fugazi, sort of like influential punk band, and they refused to like merchandise their band name, right? Like, they're like, if you want a Fugazi t-shirt, make one. Like, don't come to our shows and buy it. Come to our shows and like listen to music. And if you want to make a t-shirt, make it, right? I'm gonna buy it ready made, right? What's it gonna do for you? Thoughts on resistance?
Like organizing, as an organization, as a movement, that's one of our foundations is building power. And the way to build power is the way Dr. Tom Liv said, as an organization, we're effective because of the partnership that we've developed in the community, right? With different organizations, right? Because the Return Citizens Program can't do it alone, right? It's going to take a village, it's going to take a community, right? But another way to build power is to build means where we can be self-sufficient, right? That we're not dependent on government grant, we're not dependent on institutions to support our movement. We're doing it on our own, right? So right now, right, the governor signed legislation in 2020, restoring the right for returning citizens to have the right to vote. Right? You multiply that by 5, because I can get 5 people. So influence 5 people to vote the way I vote, right? Because that's we have to. Unfortunately, we live in a system that it's not perfect, but we have to find a way to build that power. So right now, the returning citizens program are galvanizing community partners like One Hood, right? New Direction, right? Media Aggregate, different organizations that are led by returning citizens. And we're in the process of creating a union, right? Because we want to build power. You know, I see my brother Shopping here because I want to invite him as well because he's an influential partner in the community as well. That's what we want to bring the community together so that we can build power, not just in numbers, but also financially, because that's how we dismantle the system.
To spill off of that, one of the things that I've been going on is Anti-Fascist United Front. I think that now is the time that, as the brother pointed out, that we transcend our sectarian differences and realize that we are working in different areas in the community to empower our people, to have our people represented on the local and the state level. I think that this interim year, this 2-year period, this off-year election period, is the time when activists have to understand that all politics is local. A lot of these individuals that have been in the Democratic Party and the House and the Senate, they're up for re-election. And we need to get down, doing work in the community and mobilizing people and bringing forward those activists and those individuals in the community who can run for office and stand for our needs. When we talk about Cop City, for instance, there's over 50 or so projects of Cop City being implemented in various degrees of completion as we speak. All of these Cop cities, all of these entities that we learned here and down in Atlanta have been endorsed by the city council, have been influenced by money from the police unions that was made available to the city council for education, for different types of programs and projects. So we are told that the police unions and that the police are workers, and that they need to be better trained, they need to have cameras, they need to do all of these things. The police are not workers. They aren't agents of the state. But we don't have no movement, we don't have any action going on to move to have these unions decertified under law. It's not that we would necessarily win a decertification, but it would serve for us to educate, ordinary people what happens when we call 911. When we call for the police, what happens? If our child is having an episode, a psychological episode, or a drug addict related episode, and we call 911, 2 white boys show up with guns. You see what I'm saying? So why can't we call 911 and we say we have a mental health issue here? Why isn't the team that shows up configured to deal with a mental health issue, to deal with a person who's having an emotional or psychological breakdown, rather than tell him, put his hands behind his back and on the floor, and shoot him 99 times because he didn't comply. We have to rethink, when we rethink law enforcement in our community, when we rethink public safety in our community, when we rethink social relationships that lead to dysfunctional behavior, that leads to antisocial behavior. We realize that we have to create different types of agencies that have different types of power and approach our people differently. And I think that's one of the reasons right now that if we could begin to build a united front, in 2 years' time, hopefully that united front would cease to exist and morph into a third political party, morph into a political force, so that we don't have to rely on the duopoly of the Republican and Democratic Party. The brother pointed out, I want to end with this, the brother pointed out how when African people and people of color and Latinos were addicted to heroin and to crack, to these drug epidemics that were instituted and put into our community to destabilize our community, they were considered criminals. A drug addict was considered a criminal. The only thing that they came up with was methadone to make them a state drug addict. Okay, just as dependent was considered criminals. But when Oxycontin and all of these drugs have affected white, rural, and white young people, now it's a social issue of mental health. They need help, not incarceration. We need to understand that this paradigm, this difference, is based on how the people are seen, how working people are seen by those who are in power, and how the state treats them. For instance, all of our problems require a war. Whether it's drugs, the war on drugs. Whether it's poverty, it's the war on poverty. Whether it's all of our problems require the use of this terminology of war. Right? That's how white folks think about it, you know. And rather than look at the drug problem for what it is, how it became the way it became, who it affected the most, okay? Then we wouldn't be talking about a war on drugs that our black elected officials and Latino elected officials bought into. I mean, they bought into the omnibus crime bills. They passed the three strikes you out bill. It was our own representatives. You see? So criminalizing deviant behavior works for the status quo when it applies to people of color or when it applies to immigrant or migrant populations. But you don't look at the bombing of churches and schools and mosques by a Zionist state as a crime. You look at it as their right to self-defense. You see?
Or the bombing of Philadelphia.
It's their right to self-defense. And this goes back to what we really have to understand, is that this is a very important moment in time that we're at right now.
So in typical American exuberance, it has two of them. And I think that's a really good way to describe this. So my last question is to go back to your referencing intersectionality. One of my sort of public pet peeves is that somehow intersectionality has become just to mean like diversity, right? And it's really not part of an analysis that talks about all these different systems, combined into different forms of oppression, right? So when the Combahee River Collective's writing about being African American women, right, dealing with patriarchy, dealing with racial capitalism, dealing with heteronormativity, right? That's what they're getting at, is how all these things come together, right? So I'm wondering, and you were talking about common cause, so is there a way, do you see a way to get people to come together in an intersectional way around the idea that they've been impacted by state-sponsored violence, right? The way that state-sponsored violence interrupts and in their life.
That's right. Everybody. That's
right.
But see, I'm going to let Brother I really want to jump on this because African people that were kidnapped from Africa and brought here and worked the plantations for over 250 years we got through that together with black women. We didn't get through it together using intersectional attitudes and behavior. So those who are trying to emphasize, well, you know, that this little niche of oppression affects me personally, most of this is a result of how people experience their own personal lives. The subjective factor is the dynamic factor. You know, that's not to say that their oppression isn't real. That's not to say that their feelings and their psychological trauma isn't something real that we have to deal with. But we have to understand that in the scheme of things, we are all in this shit together. We are all faced by the same class and enemy, the same white supremacist construct that we have to dismantle. We are all faced with this. Now, I understand that, you know, sister, you know, misogyny and sexist abuse affects and impacts you in a special way that it may not impact me. But that doesn't mean I'm minimizing that. What we need to do is we need to create a society or create an order in which misogyny doesn't get a breath of fresh air.
That's right.
It's not the type of behavior that our children become accustomed to. Most misogynist men, most misogynists were abused when they were children. Which goes back to what he was saying about how all this shit starts right there, you know, in the playpen. You see? So we really have to understand that we got through the bullwhip days, we got through Jim Crow, we got through sharecropping, we got through segregation together. We didn't get through it, you know, our women got through it and we left behind, men got through it and we left them behind. Who was Fannie Lou Hamer? Who was the Silent Shakur? Who was Queen Mother Moore? Who are the women that stood fast with us on the front lines against our enemy? You see? So I'm saying this to say that it's just the brother pointed out. A hashtag movement is not a movement. Huh? It's not. It's delusional. We are living in the age of instant communication. We're living in a global village, and what happens, you know, 1 hour from now, you know, we will know about it in real time. Like then the Peltier game. Yeah.
All power to the people. Let's clap on that. That's right. Long live Lenny Peltier. That's right.
Soon as that old cracker opened his mouth and said it, we heard it. We ain't even there.
That's right.
You see, somebody called us, so letters coming out. You see, so what I'm trying to say, this is the world that we're living in. So we shouldn't mistake a hashtag for organization. We should use that hashtag for communication, to spread ideas, to struggle around ideas. But organization is a face-to-face process. We have to sit across from other people and organize. We have to look them in the face. We have to fight them and get so close that we talking crazy. We got to spit on them and everything while we're talking. But we got to talk to each other face to face and organize each other face to face. We can't do it abstractly. And so I think that this is a unique opportunity for us. We have an entire generation that had their eyes opened by the genocide in Palestine during the last year. They're ready for more education. We have an unprecedented opportunity now to completely neutralize the misleadership class that led us into this electoral fiasco behind Kamala Harris. I mean, we got receipts on Hakeem Jeffries. We got receipts on Leaks. We got receipts on Sharpton. We got receipts on them now. Mm-hmm. Okay? Here's the AIPAC payroll number. Mm-hmm. You know, we got receipts on them. Here's the control of the police union over them. This is why they voted for this. This is why they voted for that. So now we could create in this vacuum, in this place, in this time, a serious political movement that's reflective of some of the dreams of my comrades, former comrades, that tried to form the Rainbow Coalition. We could bring together abolitionists, those who are fighting for reparations, those who are fighting for women's rights, those who are fighting for self-determination for African people. All of us now have a common opportunity to form a united front. And I think for us not to do this right now, at this time, given this opportunity, would be terrible.
We need to wrap up. 30 seconds.
So,
Prison state, 30 seconds.
No, around the idea of organizing.
Yeah.
So go meet somebody new. Stop talking to the same people every day. You're not going to get nowhere like that. You have neighbors, knock on their door. And if they answer, say, hi, how you doing? My name is so-and-so. I live next door. I have this really big belief on like peace, having a great neighborhood, and I would like to connect with you on that. And then listen to what that person is saying. Listen very attentively, because we're human beings and we like to pontificate. So there's going to be a very interesting moment. That person's going to tell you who they are and what their interests are within like 2 minutes. And pay attention. You just got to introduce the idea of, hi, I'm your neighbor. I love peace. I like this neighborhood. I just moved here and I would really like to keep it that way. That person's going to come back and say, me too, most likely. But there's this problem down the block with cars speeding all the time. Oh, wow, you saw that too? And then you go knock on somebody else's door and you have that same type of conversation. Hi, I'm your neighbor, so on and so forth. And then you keep that relationship going. Check in on each other from time to time. Hey, brother so-and-so. Hey, sister so-and-so. How you doing? That's called a public relationship. It's not private. You don't get into how many times they've been married. None of that nonsense. You just speak about that personal public relationship and then you build power that way. There's always something. Your whole neighborhood is known to each other. This whole block should know each other, but I promise you they don't. And if you go to a gentrified area, it's more likely that nobody's talking to each other. They're too busy walking their dogs and their strollers. So knock on doors, say hello to each other, know what your common interests are, and start to create a broader coalition, and you can make some impact.
30 seconds.
Definitely 30 seconds. It's simple, right? And I was still a line from my brother. We need to look at each other's humanity. And not the color of our skins, not our geographic, right? So one of the things we always talk about is how do we get on applications when you apply for an apartment, for a job, for a car, for a loan, right? That what is your ethnicity? Male, female, black, brown, Asian. Remove that. I'm a human being. Judge me or process my application based on my humanity. Right? When we begin to look more at our humanity, we realize that we have more in common than we have uncommon. And I think that will make us closer in attacking a lot of these issues.
Now that I'm picturing that person walking up the street with their dog and their stroller, I'm trying to think what t-shirt they're wearing. So I want to thank each one of you for participating.